Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're undertaking a really fascinating thought experiment together. We are going to look at one of the most famous ancient stories in human history, but we're going to completely strip away centuries of that traditional mythical interpretation. Instead, we're going to examine the original text of the Jonah story as if it were a literal physical incident report. By applying a modern clinical lens to these ancient words, we are going to uncover a narrative that is way more mechanical and, frankly, far more mind-bending than just a simple fable.
It's the ultimate mystery box, right? I mean, from childhood, we're taught this familiar outline of a man swallowed by a giant sea creature. But when you pause and actually interrogate the specific details recorded in the text, that biological explanation starts to violently break down. The physics just don't work, the timeline doesn't work, the survival metrics absolutely don't work. So we have to ask the big question, what if humanity's oldest fish story wasn't about a fish at all? If it wasn't a biological creature, what exactly encountered Jonah out there in the Mediterranean?
To start answering that, listen carefully to the actual testimony recorded by the subject. I went down to the moorings of the mountains, the earth with its bars closed behind me forever. Just sit with those words for a second. These are explicitly structural, mechanical terms. They describe a manufactured environment, a place of containment and descent. This quote clashes so jarringly with the idea of being inside a biological creature that it really forces us to completely reevaluate the nature of this entire encounter.
Let's start with Phase 1, the Maritime Incident.
The sequence here reads exactly like a calculated extraction. The subject flees on a commercial vessel only to be struck by a highly localized anomalous storm. This isn't random weather, you guys. It acts as a targeted intervention. The crew panics, they jettison their cargo, and finally, recognizing the target, they throw the subject overboard. Then comes step 5, the submersion event. The timeline reads perfectly as an interception. The vessel was tracked, stopped, and the specific target was extracted right into the water.
Now, what's really interesting is Phase 2, Anatomy of the Anomaly.
To properly analyze this, we need to define the exact terminology we're using to re-examine the source text. We are talking about a USO, an unidentified submerged object. By stripping away all that historical and religious framing, we can ground our investigation in modern analytical concepts. A USO is an anomalous craft operating underwater, demonstrating capabilities far beyond known marine biology or human technology. When we start looking at the text through the lens of an encounter with a highly advanced, submersible craft, all the bizarre details of the story suddenly snap right into sharp, logical focus.
Take a look at this foundational quote from the text describing the arrival of the anomaly. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. I want to draw your attention specifically to that word prepared. Actually, in some translations, it reads appointed. This is incredibly revealing. It implies a dispatched, engineered, and specifically tasked entity. It is absolutely not a random roaming animal that just happened to be swimming by hungry. It's a vehicle, sent to specific coordinates for a specific extraction mission.
We can see this clearly when we run a direct comparison. On the one hand, the reality of a biological threat, crushing pressure, corrosive stomach acid, and zero oxygen. That's literally lethal in minutes. But on the other hand, look at the actual data reported. Intact survival, conscious observation, and implied atmospheric control. This is a life-supporting containment unit for sure.
Which brings us to Phase 3, 3 days inside. 72. That is the number of hours the subject remained in isolation beneath the surface. I really cannot emphasize enough the sheer impossibility of biological survival for this duration. Without a localized engineered atmosphere, without pressure regulation, and without a breathable air mix, a human being simply does not survive 72 hours submerged in the ocean. This number alone absolutely demands that we look at technological solutions rather than biological ones.
And this brilliantly illustrates the specific sensory observations recorded by the subject during containment. He's fully conscious for 72 hours. He notes descending to the roots of the mountains, meaning extreme depth navigation. He has the physical sensation of being enclosed by bars, and he specifically mentions weeds wrapped around his head. Now think about it. If you're an ancient person inside a technological craft, how do you describe life support tubes connecting to a helmet? You don't have the word for pneumatics. You use the closest organic word you know, weeds. You describe the structural ribbing of a metal hull as bars.
We can systematically map these ancient descriptions directly to modern clinical concepts. Belly of shield translates perfectly to a subterranean descent.
The bars closing behind him correlate seamlessly to the mechanical sealing of an airlock. And as we just discussed, weeds wrapped around head maps logically to a sensory or life support apparatus. When you do a one-to-one translation of ancient vocabulary to modern technology, the text literally reads exactly like an astronaut's debriefing.
Let's move to Phase 4 and see how this builds. The ejection event.
The logistics of the object's departure are just as calculated as its arrival. Step 1, we see a rapid ascent from the ocean floor. Step 2, the anomaly navigates to very specific coastal coordinates. It doesn't just surface anywhere, it brings the subject exactly where he needs to be. And Step 3, the physical purge onto dry land. This is not the random behavior of a sick animal, folks. This is a highly precise delivery. The craft completes its mission, navigates to the drop zone, and executes a controlled release of its passenger.
Which brings us to the actual description of that release, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. Again, we have to look past the biological framing here. Imagine an ancient writer trying to describe the sudden explosive depressurization of a pressurized airlock release, or the mechanical ejection system of a submersible craft depositing a man onto a beach. They completely lacked the vocabulary for pneumatics, hydraulics, or mechanical doors. Vomiting is simply the most accurate, forceful biological metaphor they had to describe a rapid physical expulsion from an interior chamber.
So, the crucial point is this. When an ancient culture lacks the words for advanced technology, they automatically default to the language of biology. A submersible becomes a fish, hull ribs become rib cages, airlocks become mouths, life support tubes become seaweeds. If you read the text literally, taking the physical descriptions seriously but updating the vocabulary, you aren't reading a fairy tale. You're reading a highly detailed, surprisingly accurate report of an anomalous, technological encounter.
Which leaves us right here. If we accept that at least some of humanity's oldest, most mythological texts are actually surviving incident reports of genuine anomalies, well, it completely shatters our conventional timeline of history. It forces us to ask, if modern vocabulary fundamentally changes our understanding of the Jonah incident, how many other myths and miracles are simply miscategorized data? What else is hiding in plain sight, just waiting for us to find the right words to describe it? Think about that next time you look back at ancient history. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.